We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. We're talking gardening. You getting it going, your lawn? Are you planting flowers? Are you looking at your veggies and trying to get them in the ground? David Bates is joining us from over at Bates Nursery. Melissa McKay may join us throughout the program. We're going to show some demonstrations for you. And David, listen, we've got some questions. Let's just get right to it. We have some phone calls and a question. One person's asking you, Mary's asking, what are good natural ways to keep snails from getting into your garden and eating your plants?
You know, a preferred method that many use, and I have heard it's a waste viewed by some, is to put out little shallow, like a mayonnaise jar lid and pour beer into it, and they'll crawl in there and drown.
So waste of beer, huh?
And then, believe it or not, that does work. And that's very much an organic way to approach doing it. Now, it's not much of an attractant. There are slug and snail baits that are commercially available that are little pellets that you can put down around, and they will feed on it and it will kill them that way. Now, that's those are actually using an insecticide that will kill them. So if you don't want to use that, the beer in the little shallow cap works pretty well.
Pretty well. Okay, interesting.
It attracts them anyway.
Good. Yep. I like the fact that it's an organic way to do it. Cindy's saying,
well, if you see those snails kind of doing a wavy pattern, you'll know that they got in and got out.
A little too much to drink, I guess. Cindy says that she planted red cabbage and turnip greens, collard greens last November, and the cabbage is still growing and the turnip greens are doing well already this spring.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of cool season plants, is that when you don't have severe weather. Now, you referenced at the top of the show that we just a few weeks ago had some pretty severe weather, but what we also got with the cold temperatures was frozen precipitation. We got enough to insulate plants like that so that they didn't get subjected to the freezing temperatures. Therefore, they made it through the winter. So once the snow melted away, they're still there, relatively unscathed.
That is awesome.
That's a good cue for cool season plants.
Yeah. As far as Joshuana is asking, following up on the snail question, there are other pests as well. What about, maybe you can touch on some others. The beer seems to work for snails, but if you're dealing with, be it aphids or ants, or, some people have fire ants they discover. Any thoughts about dealing with some of the other common pests that will chew up your garden?
Well, those different pests will require some different tactics. We always try to recommend, first of all, the thing that is the most benign to the user and to the environment, and provides a sufficient amount of lethality to the pest that you're trying to control. So all that said, if you're dealing with things like aphids or maybe scale, spider mites, things that are on your outdoor plants, we're still at the time where you could safely use dormant oil. Now, we're rapidly running out of the time because guess what? Dormancy is almost passing. But what dormant oil does is it is a paraffinic oil that coats the stem surfaces. And what it does, it suffocates them. So, and it's non-injurious to the plant before the leaves and warm weather arrive. So if you're going to do that method, you should get on with it quickly. There is a super fine sun spray type of oil that can be used a little later. Doesn't have quite the effectiveness, but it is much less injurious to the plants. Now, if you're dealing with ant issues, fire ant issues, those take a more aggressive approach, and you'll need to use a stronger chemical type of granular product that you'll put down on the yard to be able to control that. Fire ants are a pest. 20 years ago, we really didn't have them in the area, but they have gotten their way in. And just like all other things that we might not have had back in the day, such as armadillos, you can wish you didn't have them, but that won't get rid of them. It's, and a lot of it, you can take some action and it will only be temporary. So it kind of like the moles that we've had for years, you can chase them away, but chances are, if you've got a food supply there, they're going to move back in. So a lot of it has to do with where's your tolerance. Are you more tolerant of the pest or more tolerant of what it takes to get rid of the pest? And if you want to keep things as green as possible with respect to environmental treatment, so that you're not putting a lot of harmful chemicals out into your yard. And I heard you mention that you kind of have a hodgepodge yard, and I have the same kind of yard because we choose to not use all the post-emergent herbicides that are required to control all of those weeds.
Yeah. Listen, with regard to my hodgepodge yard, real quick, I got to throw in one of my questions here. Personally, this year and end of last year, I decided I want to have a fruit orchard, David. And I have planted some smaller trees that I purchased. I've got 2 apples, which I heard you have to have 2 apple trees to self-pollinate or to pollinate, cross-pollinate.
One of them needs to be a yellow or golden delicious.
Okay, so let me tell you what I have, and you tell me what I need to upgrade.
Okay.
All right, I have 2 apples. Okay, one's golden delicious, one's green apple, or Granny Smith. I have 1 sour cherry, tree. I have 2 peaches, okay, and then I have a pear and a fig. So, do I need to get doubles of all of those, or basically just the apples?
The apple and the cherry, you probably need to get a Bing cherry, B-I-N-G cherry, which is a good pollinator. And I don't know which one did you say you had? I'm sorry.
I forget that it's a very common sour cherry tree. It's a sour cherry, tart cherry.
The Bing cherry is a sweet.
Yeah.
The Bing cherry would be a good pollinator for that. The others are probably okay. Certainly with the fig, you do not need a pollinator.
Okay.
And that's the good news. Now, the difficulty is that you gotta with fruit tree growing, and I'm talking specifically of apples, peaches, pears, cherries. Those are all those types of trees. It's important to have a reasonable expectancy of what you're going to be able to harvest from it. It takes quite a lot of work. We are in a difficult area for those kinds of fruits. That doesn't mean they don't grow here. It just means that the amount of fruit you're ever going to harvest off of it is not going to be consistent. It's not going to happen every year. You'll have one year where it may be a bumper crop where it's almost breaking the tree down, and you may go 2 or 3 years and not really have anything.
Do you know, by the way,
it's good to have a rate.
Go ahead. It's good. All right. I mean, yeah, it's catch as catch can. I'm good with that. I thought you were going to say something along the lines. I have friends who have had some of these trees. They're producing, you're right. One year, nothing. The other year, bumper crop. But they always get some kind of weird fungus or mold on the peach or the apple. And they say, well, it's because, Nick, I don't take the time to spray them. I'm just wondering, what do you have to do to prevent that kind of crap of ending up on the fruit?
Well, and therein lies the difficulty. My dad used to say, taking care of 400 or 500 fruit trees is no big deal, but 4 or 5 will work you to death. And what he meant by that is you basically have to have the same equipment to be able to spray a few fruit trees as you would to have to spray many.
Interesting.
It's not. It's a difficult job, and most people, like your friends you were referring to, they simply don't deem it to be worthwhile effort to do all that. So, if you get lucky, perhaps the rains will hit correctly. You don't have much disease problems. Maybe the birds won't bother. There are any number of things that can be problematic. I try to, and we try to recommend folks here, if they're really wanting to get a good investment on the fruit dollar, so to speak, things such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and figs, like you've got in your yard, are all really excellent. They're consistent producers, and they have a very low level of problem. So if you want a lot of fruit and you want to save money on it, it's probably just better to go buy it.
Yeah, I hear you.
And that's the honesty of it. It takes a lot of work. But it's nice to have some trees in your yard, and it's fun. It's a fun family activity.
I may have bitten off more than I can chew. Like I said, trial by error. But I'm going to give it a shot with these trees, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm glad now I'm not going in with any illusions. I'll know what awaits me. Let's take a phone call before we go to our first break. We'll go to Andrew. Andrew,
sure.
Good morning. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good. What's your questions, buddy?
Good. I have two questions. Number one, how can I get rid of moles? I have a lot of moles.
Moles, okay.
Yes. And number two, how I'm going to be working on a flower bed, there's hardly anything growing in it at all. It gets mostly shade. It gets a little sun in the afternoon. And it's right out front. So I want it to be really colorful and welcoming and that kind of thing, but I don't really know what to put there.
Oh, good. Okay, two good questions. Moles, and then what would be good in a front flower bed that maybe doesn't get a ton of sun? That's colorful.
Okay, well, I always tell people, first of all, if you've got a problem with moles, see your dermatologist. Or if you're talking about the ones that are in the yard, then that's the more difficult one to deal with.
Yeah.
And as I touched on earlier, a lot of people falsely believe that moles are there to eat grubs, and they will eat a grub occasionally. What they really love are earthworms and night crawlers, that kind of thing. So if you're going to have good success at getting rid of them, you got to give them, you got to apply a bait that will get rid of them and that they will ingest. You may have seen poison peanuts.
Yes.
That's not on the menu for moles. They won't eat them. So that's a total waste of time and money. But there are these, what are essentially a poison gummy worm for moles. One product, there's 2 or 3 brands of them, but Talparid is one that comes to mind. And they're not inexpensive, but they're quite effective. And you install them, or you put them out by walking down all the ridges the afternoon or early evening beforehand, and then in the morning you get up and you see where they are active, and then you take either a dowel rod or a piece of rebar and you poke a hole in one end of the run and one in the other end of it, and you slide one of these poison baits down in there and then cover the hole back up, and when they eat one, they are history.
Okay.
So that won't keep them from coming back because it doesn't do anything to the overall soil. However, I personally think it's a high price to pay to get rid of moles, to kill off all of the other living things in the yard. I mean, you've got a lot of earthworms do a tremendous amount of benefit, and I don't like moles in my yard any more than anybody else does, but I do tolerate them, and we get rid of them with use of Talparid or setting physical mole traps that are hit and miss, literally, to say the least.
And by the way, that gummy worm, could that gummy worm be harmful to a dog or something? You have to be careful where those go. You shouldn't want to.
But if you install them correctly, put them in the dog won't bother them. You slide it into the tunnel under the surface of the ground and cover it back up. So leave the dog inside while you're doing it, so you don't give them any ideas.
Yeah, and
they
as
might
far
want
as
to dig one up.
Do you have a quick suggestion of a few types of plants that might work well in his flower bed, which doesn't get a ton of sunshine, but he wants color?
Shade gardening is one of the more difficult things that there are to deal with, and we'll cut over here to Melissa in a minute. Maybe she's got some ideas about that. The difficulty with shade gardening is the lack of sun, and what happens is you have it's not that you don't have things that won't flower in the shade, but your palette of things to choose from is decidedly smaller. Much of what you deal with in shade gardening are the interesting and contrast of textures and colors of foliage as opposed to flowers. Melissa, you got anything you want to show us over there?
There we go. I love it.
In terms of that?
Well, we don't have a whole lot of summer annuals yet. You can.
I caught her off guard here. Sorry about that, Melissa.
That's all right. And by the way, annuals, remind folks the difference between annuals and perennials, would you, Melissa? The difference between annuals and perennials.
Okay. Perennials, you plant those, they go dormant in the winter, and then in the spring, they regrow. So their roots are just kind of sleeping.
They're forever.
During the winter, and then they pop back up. Annuals, I try to tell people, annual means you plant annually.
Gotcha.
You plant them in the spring. They work really hard to produce flowers, fruits, whatever, and then they go to seed, and that's it for them.
Okay. So I don't know.
If you get regrowth from annuals, they come back from seed possibly, but they don't come back from the roots like perennials do.
I got you. Okay, I just didn't know if she has it could be a perennial or an annual. I didn't know if there's a suggestion on something that might just go in there. You may not have one that you can show us, but maybe one that's going to come in a few weeks that would be good for Andrew.
Melissa came well prepared with annuals, but not so much with perennials today, because that's her area of expertise.
Okay.
Right. Right now, we have a few violas to offer. Violas are great for shade, and they're a cool season plant. So by around May or so, those will kind of be
those are pretty.
Doing what they're going to do. And we're going to get more begonias.
Okay.
This one is a Rex begonia. We do get what we call bedding begonias. They're a little smaller, and they do produce a flower. So the green leaf begonias are great for shade or part shade. And you can also get color. You want to think about leaf color and not just flower. So coleus is a great way to get color in your shade garden. And this is an example of one that we have. We're going to have so many different varieties within the next month or so.
Okay. They all start coming in right now. The coleus is just a classic. It's been around forever. And they do well if it's a little more shady. They don't need direct sunlight then, correct?
Correct.
All right.
All right.
Let's take another
what else
phone.
You got, Nick?
Yeah. Let's take another phone call. We got Tom. Tom, good morning. Hi, Tom.
Hey, good morning, Nick. How you doing?
Good. What can we do for you, my friend?
Well, I want to talk to your gardener there. I've got a couple of questions to ask him.
Okay.
I like planting gardens. I like experimenting quite a bit with it. And I use milk, powdered milk, for my calcium. And I also use stove ashes out of my stove. I try to use organic as much as I can.
Right.
But I've got tomato plants one year I grew as high as 21 feet.
Wow.
And yeah, I've got pictures of them.
What did you do? What was the secret on that?
The milk.
The milk. All right, maybe we're going to hit some of these. I've not heard that. And I've heard everyone say with tomatoes, everything from maybe milk, as he said, to Epsom salts and other things. Calcium, I guess, is needed for some plants. You want to comment a bit on some of these miracle fertilizers?
Well, the fact is that they're not miracles, but it's just based on the compounds that are available in those things. And milk, of course, is known to be high in calcium. It's what the dairy farmers have been telling us for years. And that calcium source is not limited to just people when they drink milk. You could take dried milk and get it. Now, there are commercially available. Maybe not everyone has dried dairy milk at their disposal. Others will more likely look for a product that's called maybe soluble calcium or Solucal. Now, these are readily available calcium sources that you can put on. One of the things that is problematic for tomato plants is what is known as bottom or blossom end rot.
I was going to ask you about that.
You'll
I
see
get that
on the bottom
every
of the
year.
tomato.
Absolutely. Tell us how you get rid of that.
That is a sure sign. That is a sure sign of calcium deficiency.
Okay.
So if your calcium levels are low, you'll need to add some calcium in order to offset that. Now, another thing that's important to keep in mind with tomatoes is that you should not plant them in the same spot every year. There are viruses and pathogens that affect tomatoes. You should move them around to different areas and not plant them in the same spot. If you're planting them in a container every year, which is perfectly all right, you will need to take that soil and replace it because it can become a problem. You don't want to grow tomatoes and potatoes together for that reason. They are first cousins to each other, and they share all the same problems with the same verticillium wilt and other diseases like that.
Awesome. Listen, we have to take a break, but I'm going to remember that about calcium. I had thought maybe some of it had to do with all of a sudden getting a lot of water. I will say this and let you comment when we come back. Last year, okay, I planted a cherry tomato, and I have chickens. I have 2 backyard chickens, Thelma and Louise. And the manure from the chickens, my cherry tomatoes exploded. It was not a bush, it was a tree. And I think it was the chicken manure. I want to know what you think of that. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more and more of your calls and comments on Facebook for our gardening expert right after this.